over before the game was done. Now if you think that I'm gonna let you run. Boom, shakalaka, ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, brothers and sisters around the world. Ow! I feel good, yo. How do you feel? I hope you're feeling very comfy. Sit back, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. We are in for a treat on this podcast. We have patiently waiting Sergio Lissone, a brilliant man, a philosopher, a libertarian, an architect, amongst many other things. And we're going to get deep into the world of philosophy, deep into the world of liberty, deep into the world of technology, what's going on in the world, period. I've been meaning to interview Sergio. I've been meaning to do some Skype interviews probably for the last few years, ever since I started doing this podcast, but the reason I kind of held back doing it was I wanted to make sure that the quality was legit, my equipment was legit, and over the years, you start getting better equipment. Best way to get into something is just to get into it. It's not going to be perfect to begin with, but over the years you find that it improves. And over the years, I've definitely been improving the equipment that I use and improving just my interviewing style. And I think that it's come to a culmination of many things where it is now the right moment for me to do a Skype interview. So Sergio is going to be, I think, one of the first guests, probably the first guest I've had on the Christian journey via Skype. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight into it. I'm about to Skype this brother from another mother, Sergio, right over here. Let's rock. Boom shakalaka. Let me just drop this image here. Put this in here and give Sergio a call right here. Huh, that's not a good beginning. Let's try this again. That's what happens when you do things on the fly. Let me see if I can get this set up now. Okay, so what do we got here? I'm a bit new to Google Hangout, but let's see if we can get this thing working. Alright, so let's invite Sergio. Wunderbar. Here we go. And theoretically, it should come up. How we doing here? Is he gonna answer? So I just want to announce that I'm a big fan of the... Oh, here we go. Hey. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, how are you all doing? We got Sergio up in here. I was just introducing you, but you know what? I think I'll let you introduce yourself. It's been some years since I spoke to you, and I know, like myself, you got your hands in quite a number of things. And Sergio, introduce my humble audience to yourself and what you do.
So I've been working for a few months now as an architect, and the main thing that I'm looking to do is create psychedelically inspired architecture that uses tribal elements and just some of the things that I see in my imagination and try and make them real. I'm currently in a drawing course, learning how to draw my ideas more realistically. Mm-hmm. And also I use 3D graphics to express my ideas. And my current project is a retreat for a psychology and meditation center.
That sounds awesome, man. In fact, I didn't realize that what you do is so integrated into so many different fields. I mean, you mentioned that you're an architect, and you're also trying to bring in this psychedelic imagery, which kind of has this artistic influence. I mean, when I think of architecture, I think of something that's very left brain, logical thinking, mathematically oriented, which it is, no doubt. And then you're adding this psychedelic influence to it. That with the whole, the technological aspect, the fact that you're using 3D imagery. It's like you're stepping into all these different worlds and coalescing into this this brilliant thing that you do. You know, it's kind of hard to find a passion where you get to be creative and I guess apply so many different tools. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess with my intention is to go back to the drawing board, to start from scratch, to look at the beginnings of civilizations and look at some of the earliest forms of architecture that exists in tribal societies, and start from there and progress from there with ideas. Because I reject wholeheartedly everything to do with the right angles and squares and rectangles that dominate architecture now, as well as random shapes, just making things creative by making them random. I don't think that's real creativity. Whereas when I think of psychedelic experiences, what I get is complexity, order, harmony, integrity. And these are the kinds of things that I would like to create in architecture.
No doubt. What I find fascinating, I mean, I don't know much about architecture, but I know a little bit about sacred geometry, and from what I understand, many of the principles in sacred geometry were actually used in much of the ancient architecture. And whereas I would imagine that there's a formula, there's a particular approach to creating good architecture, I'd imagine as an artist you often break those rules and try to create something with your own imagination. And would you say that your approach to architecture now is more in line with the traditional sense, or is it something that's very new, like you kind of moved into a new world of architecture of the last, I guess, in your experience?
Well, when I had psychedelic experiences, what I saw were shapes that were different to anything I'd seen before. But I found them beautiful, and the more I visualized them, the more in those experiences, the ideas were able to just take shape and produce more beauty in my mind. And that was that's what really inspired me to take this whole direction. So what I've created so far is dome-based architecture. So which isn't that original, but I've done some interesting things with textures and colors and so on them. But with what I really want to create, I've never seen anything like it before, so it's going to be quite special when it comes out.
Sure. I got to say, it's really interesting to speak to you after all of these years, because I feel like we both, I mean, let me know if I'm kind of speaking over my place at this point, but I feel like as far as my journey goes, over the last maybe 5-6 years, I've kind of gone through different phases and like changed my attitude towards how I view the world. And I'd say that when I first met you, your mindset was very much in the like logical reasoning kind of. Obviously, you've always been a creative person, and over the last maybe few years, just the interactions that I've had with you over Facebook, like you seem to have opened your mind at the world of like psychedelics and creativity and. I don't know, for lack of a better word, spirituality, and
Sure.
I find it really interesting just how you arrived at that. Is that something that you kind of fallen into recently, or is it something that you kind of always had a mindset in?
Well, I guess I always, with my creative side, it was always a very spiritual experience. But I didn't use that word for it at the time, and I kind of dismissed all spirituality as mystical nonsense because it really had nothing to do with any sort of reality that I could see. All of these mystical descriptions of the world seemed very like just children playing with their imaginations, making stuff up. And I thought, well, this isn't useful. So that was my experience of spirituality in the past. But what shifted for me was around 4 years ago. I was very depressed at the time and feeling very disconnected from myself. And I didn't really know what was wrong. But I knew from the past that psychedelics could make a difference. So I did lots of research on this, and I saw that there was some evidence that psychedelics, although risky, could reverse depression. So I did LSD, and it blew my mind. Like, I had the most amazing experience on it. I listened to this incredible song that I'd saved for the occasion to only listen once before, and in it I had this vision that basically was. What I realized is what I was seeing was all these. It was like I was seeing the inside of my soul, the inside of my mind. I was seeing all the characters that make up me, and in amongst them there were some wise characters, like spiritual guides of some sort. They weren't me, but they were talking to me. And in that experience, I realized, okay, so maybe this is what all these spiritual teachers are talking about. Maybe they're talking about parts of yourself that are wise, that are outside of yourself, but that are giving you guidance. And in that light, as metaphors, all of these spiritual teachings, or a lot of them, might have some merit as a guide to living a better life, as a guide to finding some sort of inner fulfillment and harmony.
Sure. I feel like you're talking about archetypes there. I mean, when you're talking about seeing these different aspects of yourself during this transcendent experience through psychedelics, I mean, one of the things that I've definitely seen a strong connection with is, well, psychology. Whereas psychology initially, essentially, it's from the Greek word psyche, which dealt with spirit or soul. We kind of look at psychology as a way of understanding the mind, understanding things more in, like, I would imagine, a physical plane, but in a way, it's a way of understanding, I guess, what makes up the consciousness, and in a way that's kind of, depending on how you want to look at it, tied to the whole concept of the soul. And like, what I always find that people get caught up, you know, with what terminology you want to use, but to me, it's very clear that there are obviously aspects of you. Like, I definitely believe that there are aspects to you. In fact, I think we're multidimensional beings, you know, in the fact that whereas I may be here on this physical plane, there's definitely another aspect to me, and it's quite possible that when you go into the world of psychology and you have a look at the makeup of the unconscious, the subconscious, and, you know, the ego, there are these other aspects of you, and sometimes they manifest in parts of your personality. But I feel like there definitely is there's definitely a link between the whole psychology, the science of psychology, and spirituality, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about your journey over the last 2 years, because whereas I would imagine, I think it's fair to say that you've definitely become more open to the idea of spirituality, whereas that's where I started off with. I was brought up as a Christian Mormon, very influenced by the whole Judeo-Christian faith, but also by the Eastern schools of thought. Over the years, I've definitely become more logical and rational in the way that I look at the world, and whereas I try to structure, whereas I may feel a particular way, I try to ground my arguments around reason and logic, particularly when I'm having a conversation with someone that's outside of a spiritual mindset, because I find often you can get into this block, this wall, where you're essentially just expressing your opinions, you know, and it's kind of hard to arrive at what actually is. And I think it's very important, particularly when, I mean, I've always been a fan of philosophy, and I think a philosopher is essentially someone that loves wisdom, loves truth, you know. And if you're trying to understand the world, understand truth, you need to apply yourself in a particular way that opens you up to reality, whatever it is. And I think one of the ways we do that is through reason and logic. Of course, there are other ways of doing that, but I found, because of the barriers that I encountered by having these airy-fairy conversations with certain people, you know, that would just sometimes make up random concepts, you know, which I'm sure you find when you have conversations with hippies. It can become a little weird, you know, when you realize that often you're not arriving at any real kind of definitive truth. So it's just fascinating. You know, one thing I really wanted to ask you, man. Obviously, you have your own kind of perspective towards life, your own your own philosophical grounding. I mean, what is your philosophy when it comes to reality, when it comes to morality, when it comes to truth? Because I know that you take on a very libertarian, freedom-oriented mindset. What's the meaning of life, Sergio? If there's an easy question to throw at you. How do you see the world, and how do you see social interactions with people, how they should be?
Well, so I guess I'll take a broad view first. I think that there are different domains of the mind, different aspects to it that have different rules. So when it comes to reality, I think spirituality has nothing to teach us about the material plane at all. I think that we need philosophy and science and reason as the domain of reason primarily. is the domain of material reality. And if you want to deal with material reality and master it, you only should be relying on reason and any feelings that you have that support that as well, of course. But your fundamental orientation when dealing with reality should be reason. But when it comes to the workings of your subconscious mind and the workings of your emotions, reason has much less to teach you. They work by a different set of rules, different set of principles. And that's what spirituality has to teach us about. Now, in the same way that a beautiful song will move you, but talking about that beautiful song won't have the same effect on you, I believe that understanding spirituality won't make you a happy or whole person, but just accepting some of the principles, just reading some of it as you would poetry and getting inspired and moved by it is what can teach you and give you some value in spirituality. So I think it's a mistake to try and create a rational understanding of spirituality. Leave it alone, you'll ruin the magic of it. So in the same way as you would ruin a song if you completely deconstructed it. Mm-hmm. So let it have its own magic. Now, when it comes to how we should live in a rational way, I'm a libertarian fundamentally, or an anarcho-capitalist. I believe that there should be no use of force in order to achieve your goals, except in self-defense. So if you want to do something with another person, you got to persuade them. If you can't persuade them, then you can't do it. And that's my fundamental conviction. Your property is yours, your body is yours, your energy is yours, and you get to use them as you see fit, provided that you don't initiate force against any other person or their property. I believe that gives us a very, very minimalist rule, a single rule by which everything can be, everything else that you can possibly imagine is allowed, except for that. So you have maximum freedom in this kind of society where you have a force as being the only thing that's prohibited. That allows everything else that's possible in human behavior. And, you have the freedom to do stupid or unhealthy things if you want to do them. But ultimately, there is a certain long-term price to pay for such things.
Sure. Provided you're not forcing your ideals onto someone else, you can do whatever you want to yourself, that kind of thing. As in
exactly
responsibility for your own self, but you can't force responsibility onto others, that kind of thing. Exactly.
And once again, if you want other people to be responsible, as I do, even though I'm a libertarian, I have some fairly conservative ideals about how you should actually live your life. Like, I believe in not just living for the moment, but having certain long-term pleasures, long-term happiness as your goals, not just short-term impulsive thrills and hedonism. You can do it in a free society, but I don't think you should if you want to be happy in the long run.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's interesting hearing your philosophy on this, and one of the things I find really fascinating is that, look, you and I share exactly the same moral philosophy. In fact, I'd say, I think going back to the earliest conversation I had with you, it became very clear that your morals were in line with mine, whereas we wouldn't see the world in the same way. We'd have various tumultuous discussions on things dealing with spirituality, because I do come from a spiritual mindset, and what's interesting is that whereas you've arrived at anarcho-capitalism, libertarianism through a secular approach to reality, many people like myself have arrived at that with an understanding of spirituality. And I guess sometimes people define what spirituality is differently, but to me, when it comes to morality, like unless from my perspective, unless you accept the idea that there are certain things that are definitively right or wrong, and the only way that you can do that is like in the realm of rights specifically, the whole idea of someone being born with an inalienable right, at least from the perspective of the founding fathers, was because that these rights were ordained by the Creator. I mean, most of the founding fathers, they were deists, so believed in the whole concept of a Creator. I mean, that's the only way, at least from my mind, that you can get into the idea of a definitive right, unless, of course, you, I suppose, take on a secular approach of you own yourself, self-ownership, that kind of route. But if I can just continue, I guess my only difference in viewpoint is that whereas I've arrived at many of your arguments, the same arguments, your same worldview, I've taken it from a more non-secular approach, and whereas my outlook towards life is actually guided by spirituality, I actually explain that within at least what I would call a rational logical sense, like the way in which I look at science and philosophy and all of these different areas of life, whereas the Aristotelian approach is to kind of like categorize all of these different isms, like Aristotle was a proponent of this idea that everything must be broken down into different categories, and you find Plato would take on a more holistic approach. So when we're looking at something like technology, when we're looking at something like what people might call spiritual ideas, my attitude is that if it works, if it is real, it is real. Granted, technology may have seemed like some kind of metaphysical non-tangible idea a few hundred years back. Obviously, through reason, logic, empiricism, we've actually discovered many of these definitive technological ideas. And I guess my idea is that there are many things within what people would call spirituality that are actually definitive things. It's just that it happens that we lack the science or the rationale to be able to measure these things. So whereas I would imagine the distinction between the way you see the world is that there's certain things, spiritual things, that should be only applied in the spiritual world dealing with psychology and should then be brought into the realm of physicality. My outlook is that there is no separation, between the different realms of isms, whether that's technology, whether that's science. If something is, it is. Now, granted, if we discover in 100 years' time that there is something to do with subtle planes, this is a term that you use when you're dealing with other bodies outside of this physical plane. Or just like a few hundred years ago, rather, we discovered that there were obviously microorganisms, that consisted of the microorganisms that made up human beings. We understood that obviously there's more to this world than meets what we can see within our five-sense reality. Once you go into the world of microorganisms and whatnot, my attitude is that there is a great deal of things that can be learnt in regards to spirituality. Now, granted, we don't have the apparatus to measure these things. If you learn from many of the teachers that have become before you, one of the things about the scientific method is if you actually follow the lineage, people like Sir Francis Bacon, they were all students of many of these esoteric mystery school knowledge. Benjamin Franklin, these the Freemasons, they actually dealt into things that were considered to be heretical at the time or weren't understood, but they were just forms of science that hadn't become exoteric. And I guess it's my viewpoint that whereas I'd imagine you would see a lot of distinctions between spirituality and something like technology or science. My attitude is that the distinctions that we see, because we haven't fully understood how to measure these things, I guess what I'm saying is that they're not necessarily made up. Like, granted, a lot of them are, but it just requires us progressing far enough to be able to use science and use technology in order to integrate the spiritual concepts into these other disciplines, if that makes sense.
Well, one thing I can see from what you're saying that resonates with me is this idea that you don't want to be like a computer when dealing with the world. You're just a rational, logical robot who has no fun in life. And I think that, so when I say using reason exclusively as your tool for dealing with life in the material world, I mean just in terms of trying to understand it. Like, to the extent that you're trying to understand the real world, use reason. But if you want to what's the word? Well, if you want to have a more profound relationship with the world, you can certainly you want your subconscious as much as possible to be interacting with the world along with your ego. So you want to be experiencing things in a more complete,
Absolutely,
whole way.
So use the right tools for the right kind of thing. Like obviously, you're not going to use a piano or a guitar in order to construct a house. And you would use something like that in order to like calm someone down or to have an emotional effect on someone. I see what you're saying. I guess the only thing I would add to that is that I believe that there are many ways to actually understand reality. And in fact, Manly P. Hall, his entire perspective when it came to this was that there are three ways of arriving at truth. One is through philosophy, which has this beautiful quote that expresses how you can use this philosophical basis, which isn't necessarily using the scientific method, but is essentially using reason and logic to understand reality through empiricism, through rationale. Then, of course, there's the scientific method. And then he also speaks about what I guess people may refer to as spirituality, but more specifically gnosis, which is this idea that there is this understanding within the consciousness of man, like this innate, latent ability to derive truth. Call that your intuition, call that your, if you want to look at a more scientific level, this evolutionary wiring that you have, or I guess from a more spiritual perspective, the idea that within you there is this innate understanding, like the logos. There is this inner blueprint that you have that allows you to recognize when something is truthful, when something resonates with you. Just like when you hear two notes on a piano and they sound off. Rationally, you may not necessarily understand that it's off, but you intuitively understand that it is because your body, your senses are working in order to discern what is and what is not. So I guess my attitude is that whereas I will try to understand things, generally speaking, from a place of rational reasoning when I'm dealing with a scientifically minded thing, I can still respect that other people may apply different tools and still arrive at the same truth. And at the end of the day, if something works, if something is actually truthful, it is, regardless of how you arrived at it. If it does serve you, I see that as being beneficial.
Well, I think it can only properly serve you if you're using the right domain for the right. If you're using the right tools for the right domain. So, for instance, I would only use if I wanted to find out the truth about something in objective reality. I would only use logic or reason or evidence to do it. Nothing else. Or a feeling that's based on experience that can be, if that could, in theory, be analyzed properly. Sure. If you wanted to go in that direction.
The scientific method.
Sometimes you can just trust your gut instinct because you can trust your experiences. But if you wanted to probe them more further with reason, you would probably find out that it all checks out anyway. But when it comes to intuition and emotions and your subconscious way of perceiving reality, your mind actually isn't an accurate reflection of reality. It's a simulation of reality that has a certain organic, human, and mammalian, reptilian quality to it.
Sure.
That isn't an accurate reflection of the world, but is close enough that we can get by very well.
Sure, I agree with that.
Now,
sure, go on.
There's certain nuances to the way that we process things. You don't want to mess with your intuition. You want to use it. You want to experience the world as much as possible as an emotional being because it's the most fulfilling way to do it. But at the same time, don't mistake that for the objective truth. If you want to know the objective truth, use the objective tool sets for it. And then you break out of your natural human thinking style and use the linguistic, logical, analytical style of thinking, that reason that will get you the answers you're looking for
Absolutely.
objectively.
I hear what you're saying. And to me, I feel like it comes down a bit to like the different artists, different artisans in different fields. And whereas obviously you're a proponent of the scientific materialistic world, and you've seen how effective that is, and you're a master of that, it would make perfect sense that you're more inclined to use this to arrive at truth. And I guess there are certain people in the world, whereas they come from this more of an intuitive world, and they've been able to navigate themselves using their intuition, and they find that that makes more sense to them. They'd be more inclined to use something like that, just based on the fact that their experiences have led them to trust it more. But whereas I completely understand what you're saying, that it makes more sense to use your reason, logic, objective evidence because it's more reliable. I guess depending on how effective you are at applying those tools, sometimes it may or may not be effective for you to use that particular tool. There's certain people that don't work well within the realms of reason and logic and, well, just evaluating reality from a left-brain mindset, but they may, for instance, have a very good intuition about them, or may be able to apply other tools that allow them to arrive at the truth. But do you see where I'm coming from in regards to how it does come down to some extent how good you are at applying the process that you're using, even if that's the scientific method?
Well, I think use reason wherever intuition isn't enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Wherever your emotional experience and so on isn't sufficient to give you the truth, and when you need the truth, then step into that analytical mindset and use it. And if you don't have that, try and develop it, because it's something that little children naturally have, a rational, logical understanding of the world, in addition to their other ways of understanding the world. Mm-hmm. Kids get logic. They've got to have it beaten out of them, lied or deceived out of them, or punished out of them, in order to lose that ability to think logically and just stop developing it. Okay. When I was growing up, my mom used to play logic games with me, and I loved it. It was fun. It was like a little challenge, and the result of that was I felt whenever I would ask why, I would get an answer. Whenever she would never just say just because I said so. So I always
had an inquisitive mind that was nurtured about you.
Exactly. And as a result of that, I was able to do things with my mind logically that a lot of people don't do. And I think they could do, but they just don't.
I completely agree with that. I think what often happens in society is that we stop asking questions. We just accept things without actually doing the research. I mean, that's one of the things I found, particularly in the realm of, I mean, I know, like myself, you're very interested in cryptocurrencies, and any situation where something becomes big enough and there are all of these different opinions that are going on, different there's going to be inclined to be different perspectives, and it becomes difficult to sift out what is the truth, and more often than not people just go along with what the mainstream public is saying. And I found that this happens a lot, in pretty much every area of society. This is why we have the whole idea of fake news. But I've definitely found that people often accept things without actually inquiring about them. And I've definitely found that, particularly in the world of cryptocurrencies, in regards to a lot of the things that have been said about certain characters. And something I wouldn't mind discussing with you, because I know being a libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, it kind of almost goes hand in hand. You're familiar with the world of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin Cash. And is that something that you fell into from a libertarian mindset, or is that something that you fell into because, hey, I want to make lots of money, and you caught the bug like everyone else, saw it going through the roof? If you can tell us a bit about that. I
first fell into it from a libertarian mindset. Mm-hmm. When I just found out it might be like an alternative to... so I'm getting a bit of an echo.
It's coming all right from my end. It's all good.
Yeah. So I first I heard about cryptocurrencies, and it seemed appealing to me, just because I was like, okay, so it's like non-government money. Mm-hmm. That sounds pretty great. But I was like, also, what is this digital nonsense? It's not backed by anything. It's not like gold or whatever. how could this be money? It's just bits and electricity and what? So that was my reaction when I first heard about it in like 2012 or 2011. But then in 2013, I saw that it was going up in value, and I started learning more about it. And when I figured out what it was, I was like, okay, this could be revolutionary if it takes off. If we end up using this as a currency, this could be huge. But it depends on people adopting the technology. If they adopt it, then it's got value to it, and it's incredibly useful compared to normal money, and even compared to gold. Because what I saw that really convinced me was Bitcoin isn't just a currency, it's a package of financial services, revolutionary financial services that are really intelligent and programmable and expandable in future. It basically can do everything that banks can do. And this is the blockchain technology in particular. So we can see other more innovative platforms like Ethereum really exploding in terms of the amount of innovation that's happening on them and the kinds of cool things that you can now do on the blockchain. These kinds of things are what's been really convincing me of the value of cryptocurrencies. And
sure.
I love how much money they make.
Naturally, I think being an anarcho-capitalist, you definitely see the benefit of, well, profit or making money. I mean, a lot of people look at that in a very negative light, but I look at it, like I'm sure yourself, as a way to actually influence change in the world. The more money you have, the more you can apply yourself to things that you're more passionate about, the more that you can devote yourself to more charitable things, if you want to call it that. So I definitely like yourself, saw the value from a technological standpoint, and it's only probably over the last year or two, like a lot of my understanding in regards to economics and politics, whereas I've always been grounded in the interest of philosophy and spirituality, for lack of a better word, some metaphysics, anything dealing with the ancient Vedic scriptures or medical sciences, that kind of stuff. It's probably been only around the last 3 or 4 years that I've opened my mind more to the realm of economics and listening to a lot of the anarcho-capitalists talk about money and understanding the two schools, Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics, and then realizing that fundamentally everything that we're saying, it all came down to the way in which I see the world from a philosophical standpoint. I mean, the fundamental ideas of, I would say, libertarian ethics, like the whole non-aggression principle, that kind of stuff. And I keep saying from our very first conversation, like I noticed that you and I share this, and I think you were the very first person that expressed to me an idea around the non-aggression principle. I remember coming to you one time, we had a conversation around ethics, and whereas I took on a more of an intuitive approach, like I knew things that were definitively wrong, just based off of my upbringing, don't rape, don't assault, don't steal, that kind of stuff. I would never express it within an actual philosophy, and you were one of the first people, I think, that did that within the realms of the non-aggression principle or natural law. And once you understand these principles and you apply it to the system of economics, you have Austrian economics, the whole idea of not being able to print money and devalue other people's dollar, because essentially that's theft, or doing something that is violating consent. Essentially, when you apply that to the realm of money, this is how you get the entire Bitcoin thing. And once I realized that much of my views was pretty much an extension of what I already felt within myself, as far as it's definitively wrong, I realized that I'd always actually been an anarcho-capitalist or an anarchist or whatever else you want to call it. I don't even get into the labels. And my entire philosophy on money was in line with Bitcoin. Everything from the anarchic structure of the system, like the whole idea of having a system where, if people want to use Bitcoins or whatever other cryptocurrency, they get on board with that. They understand the agreement, so to speak, if they do their research, and everything's open source, it's free, no one owns it. And you know what? If they don't want to use it, they can use something else. Or if enough people agree to change or to come up with a new cryptocurrency through a fork, so to speak, can fork off and it's essentially a representation of an anarchic system, like a system where freedom is in play, of the non-aggression principle. It's pretty much a representation of libertarian philosophy, and that's one of the things that drew me to it. Sorry?
Order without force.
Absolutely, absolutely. So personally, I found that most of my interests, whether that's all my views, so to speak, whether that's political economics, whether that is anything dealing with how to create a society, has all been tied into this one philosophy, which is a philosophy that I always had: the idea that you have a right to do what you want, provided you're not directly harming anyone else. And it gets complicated because people define aggression under different categories, so to speak. But yeah, that's the experience that I've had. And it's one thing I want to get your opinion on, because we're coming up to the hour now, is there is this tremendous civil war that's going on in the Bitcoin community at the moment. No doubt you're aware of that. Someone that keeps up to date with the news in the crypto sphere in regards to Bitcoin Cash, the many forks that have taken place. And it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that. Have you been following what's been going on in that world? And have you, not that you have to have taken a side or something, but do you have any thoughts in regards to what's going on there?
Yeah, I haven't followed it in too much detail, but I'm of the opinion that Bitcoin does need to get its shit together when it comes to adopting some more modern technologies. These include fixing the scaling issue that it has. I mean, it's ridiculous that it still has that issue after God knows how many months of going on. And
well, in fairness, it has gone significantly down, but apparently it's because people aren't using it as much. As far as the price, as far as the congestion, I haven't had any major issues when I send money now. But back in late December, I was having some massive issues. No doubt you're aware. That's why I was like, fuck this, I'm going the way of the Bitcoin Cash. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, they really do need to adopt those SegWit, and there was a proposal for SegWit 2 that was going to fix all this stuff, but it turned out to be a scam.
Yeah, at least the leadership was a little
unfortunate.
Yeah, it was not what we expected.
No, fake people on the team and stuff. But yeah, I think that Bitcoin. I don't know how this happens, but I think that Bitcoin should have a new series of technologies pushed through, and they should aim to get the 95% consensus or whatever they need to get these new technologies pushed through that are going to fix the scaling issue. And I think very strongly as well, Bitcoin needs to adopt the Zcash, the zero coin protocol.
Sure. Well, the Lightning Network, according to the BTC crew, is going to resolve a lot of the problems. I mean, as far as the scaling issue, as far as the congestion, all that kind of stuff.
Is that going to go through?
Well, they have implemented it on a very small scale. From what I understand, the thing is, you're always getting different arguments from different sides. I mean, but look, from what you can say definitively is they've actually tested this in regards to on a smaller scale with a few nodes. And as far as implementing this on a mass scale, it's going to take a lot longer. And a lot of people within the Bitcoin Cash community are saying that, look, unless you can actually implement this thing on a much larger scale, it's not really, there's no point. It could take a much longer time. And the other thing is they've been saying that the Lightning Network is on the verge of being launched, for a few years now. Hasn't come. And I guess my attitude is, whereas I understand the argument that ultimately this thing is not just about scalability, things working fast, effectively, as far as us using it. It also comes down to the decentralization argument. Essentially, you want to have a cryptocurrency that is censorship resistant, decentralized, so that it's not going to face the threat of being shut down by government. So they're kind of like two different ways of looking at this. But fundamentally, I guess I come from the place of the most important thing is, at least right now, that this thing is working, like what you're saying. Got to address the scaling issue, got to make sure that this thing is massively adopted, because unless, of course, there are enough people that want to use this thing, it's not going to take off. And no matter how decentralized it may be and how effective it is, if people don't want to use something that doesn't work, it comes down to basic economics, And because I feel a lot of people were using Bitcoin, particularly last year, because of this idea that it was going to go up in value. It was kind of a speculative currency, as opposed to seeing the real utility in it and realizing, oh, wait, this thing does better what I currently do with my own fiat currency, so I'm going to continue to use this. And it's only up till probably only the last month that I've actually started seeing the real utility in using cryptocurrencies to the point where I'm actually purchasing things with them now. Bitcoin Cash specifically.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Well, what I can see is both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash could benefit from anonymity. Because I really don't like this whole being able to trace every transaction that's ever happened on the blockchain. That's not useful for a lot of businesses who don't want their purchasing decisions and business partners and everything like that completely transparent to the world. And yeah, sure, it's not immediately obvious who is transferring what, but that can be figured out by just analyzing the blockchain. There's already solutions to this, such as Zcoin.
Zcash,
and Zcoin does it properly. Every time you use a coin in Zcoin, it gets destroyed and a new one gets minted that has nothing to do with the old one. Complete anonymity. That is the kind of thing that I'd like to see implemented in Bitcoin as the biggest cryptocurrency. If it wants to stay the biggest, it needs to stay ahead of the game when it comes to these technologies. And I hope that the Bitcoin core team just pushes these things through so that, and just wait, and we can just wait for it to get the 95% consensus adoption for it to go through. I don't see why that can't happen, but maybe I'm misunderstanding the situation.
Well, the thing to consider about this cryptocurrency, the whole world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general, is that it's I see it very similar to the way in which many societies work, or any ism for that matter. Once it gets large enough, whereas the people that were involved in Bitcoin initially, they had a libertarian mindset. You know, the first heavy movers of Bitcoin were anarcho-capitalists. They're the ones that saw the value in adopting something like this. And over the last few years, because this thing has blown up, you found that one of the things that I've noticed is the people that are generally moving towards Bitcoin. Of course, you got the anarcho-capitalists and the technology-oriented people, but you have a lot of people who have different philosophies and they want different things. So you've been seeing Bitcoin move in a direction where people are trying to implement different things that aren't necessarily in line with what the initial adopters of it were in line with. I mean, in regards to Bitcoin, when it comes to the understanding of economics, most of the people that were on the team, and this is the argument Roger Ver makes a lot, they were in favor of this thing being like electronic cash and having utility. And the whole idea of trying to have expensive mining fees, all that kind of stuff, that was an idea that was promoted by certain core developers within the community, but it had only arrived at that because there'd been this kind of like takeover, so to speak, whereas enough people had infiltrated the libertarian camp that were working on Bitcoin that the consensus was no longer, just like a few years back, the consensus may have been for a bummer president. Now the consensus is obviously shifted towards someone along the lines of more of a Republican idea like Donald Trump. And it's interesting because you can see that over time, if enough people shift, if the consensus shifts to a point where people are no longer in line with where Bitcoin was going, you start getting a different thing that's not necessarily Bitcoin. I mean, if Bitcoin changes to the point where a lot of people, for instance, were wanting to look at Bitcoin as a store of value, as opposed to performing any electronic peer-to-peer transaction, they wanted to have this thing purely as a way of storing their money. And granted, that's changed a lot over the last few weeks, and I think the argument now is that we want this thing to be like electronic cash, and we want to keep the fees cheap. Not that long ago, a lot of the Bitcoin core supporters were playing a different tune, saying that they wanted to have heavy mining fees. They wanted this thing to be a good store of value. Didn't want the focus to be on electronic cash, and it all comes down to the consensus of the people, and that's one of the difficult things. It's very easy that, given enough time, if the majority of the public wants something to be going in a different direction. Now, granted, everything is open source here. Ultimately, it just takes enough coders, enough of the uses enough people of all the different constituent parties that determine the governance model of Bitcoin to change in a direction that is no longer in line with, let's say, the libertarian movement, and then you get this this situation that we have now. So whereas you and I may want certain things, unless of course the consensus wants these things, it's not going to happen. But the beauty, of course, is that you can fork. Enough people can come up with something else, come up with their own coin, or if like you're saying, enough consensus agrees to fork off in a particular direction, they can start their own coin, so to speak. So I guess that's how much of the nonsense that's taking place in Bitcoin has erupted. It's not so much an accident, but it's pretty much a feature of Bitcoin. The fact that you are going to have this debate, you are going to have forks, you are going to have different opinions being expressed in the world of Bitcoin and pretty much all cryptocurrencies. You know?
Yeah, I see that, and I think that the ideal is for it to be Bitcoin and for Bitcoin to get its act together. But and I don't think that this high mining fee situation is an ideal that anyone on the consumer end wants. This is probably just what the miners want. But even then, the miners of Bitcoin will eventually lose out if Bitcoin fees remain too high for too long, because people just switch to other cryptocurrencies.
Sure.
So, like I've diversified. I no longer just have Bitcoin, and if I need some money quickly, like fiat, I won't wait for my Bitcoin to process. I'll transfer something else and get that to process.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's kind of sad in that initially, I would imagine, this is what I'm hearing, people wanted Bitcoin to be the actual coin. In fact, it had something like 90% of the market cap not that long back, and now it's gone down to maybe 40%. And it's reached a point where people like yourself and I have had to move to other cryptocurrencies because we don't see either the utility or, personally, I just didn't like the philosophy that I saw being perpetuated by the Bitcoin core community. Of course, I'm speaking in a very kind of like general sense over here, and we're all individuals, but I was noticing this general argument that was taking place and wasn't in line with what I was feeling in regards to the Bitcoin core people, generally speaking, which is all around the idea of hating any kind of competition, not wanting to have a system where people can actually fork off. And I mean, their argument, without wanting to go too much into this, was that they saw centralization taking place in the Bitcoin Cash camp, and the fact that by increasing the block sizes, it's going to require miners to have more powerful computers, which is going to lead to centralization. And to me, I kind of look at that as, yeah, fair enough. If it is going to create centralization a little, but you know what? That's what happens in a free market. In that you're going to have And a lot of people I found were very much against the idea of that because they're so caught up on no power because they want to have decentralization that they're willing to attack people that were simply just wanting to compete in a free market. And it's kind of the argument that I find a lot of the socialists tend to be proponents of, this idea of, hey, we got to have equality, we can't have inequality, therefore we're going to take away the power of anyone that has too much power, too much influence. And this is what I find to be one of the fundamental distinctions between the philosophy of a lot of Bitcoin core supporters versus Bitcoin Cash. Maybe I'm generalizing, but this is just how I have seen things based off of the Twitter feeds that I'm constantly going through.
Sure.
Yeah, but anyway, Sergio, my brother, what's going on in your world at the moment? It sounds like you're pretty financially free. I mean, the last time I heard from you, you're working. You're obviously able to focus on your architecture. You seem to have enough free time to do what you love doing. What's happening in your world at the moment?
So I might go back and get a job again soon, working for an architecture firm. I might see if I can do my kind of designs working for them.
Okay.
At the very least, learn from that process. But if I can make some money off my designs soon, then I might be able to instead just keep freelancing, and that would be ideal.
No doubt. I think being able to live your passion, that's the ideal, right? Follow your bliss.
Exactly. I'm going to have to partner with architects anyway, because I need to, my interest is in the aesthetic side of the design, and I need to partner with people to do technical drawings and to do work out details of plumbing and electricians and all that sort of thing, and council regulations and all that stuff, which I have zero interest in. So there are people who are good at that stuff, and I want to partner with them.
I'll be sure to share the links to your art, your architecture. I have your Twitter on my podcast showing as we speak. So if you have any stuff that you can send me to your website, so other architectures perhaps that want to hit you up and work on something, if they're inclined to do so, they can get through to you through my podcast. But Sergio, was there anything else you wanted to plug yourself, any other stuff that you're working on before we wind this thing down? I think we hit the 1 hour mark now.
I'm working on a master plan city design. I've been working on it for 12 years in my mind, and I finally put all the pieces together in my head and worked out how the whole thing is going to look. So I'm going to get started in the next few weeks on actually building it in the computer and using my drawing course to start drawing pieces of it and really start fleshing the design out. So that's going to be my major project over the next few years. And the end result is going to be an animation of the whole thing set to a beautiful piece of music. That's my current focus.
That sounds awesome, man. I think it really is a powerful way to live your life when you can incorporate all these different disciplines, like your passion for music, architecture, and you're working in all these different places. You're definitely someone that's doing that. Sergio, I want to wind this thing down. We've hit the 1 hour mark, but thanks so much for giving up your time. I value your time, man. You're a knowledgeable guy. I've always enjoyed the conversations I've ever had with you. Regardless of whether they're tumultuous, we've definitely had our arguments over the years. But I've always looked at you as someone that has a very sound understanding of philosophy and ethics, and I really appreciate your input on my podcast. You're a scholar, you're a gentleman, and once again, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here, man. And I shall be sure to plug you on the Critical Journey. This should be up in the next couple of hours on YouTube if you want to check it out. I'll be sure to post that on your Facebook.
Thank you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start doing these Skype interviews a bit more regularly. In fact, I have Vin Amarni coming on my podcast in a couple of weeks. He's probably one of the key figures in the Bitcoin movement. He's a software engineer. He's an artist. He's a libertarian. He's an author. He is a gigolo, a man of many trades. So, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to tune in. Be sure to subscribe. Telling your mom about my podcast. And Sergio, I salute you. I appreciate you as a fellow libertarian, a fellow scholar, and fellow artist, my friend. Peace out. Until next time, let us know, man, if you ever got something to share. You want to come back on my podcast, man. I'd love to have you on anytime.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, brother.
Bye, Krishna.
Peace out. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Sergio Lissone, old friend of mine, fellow philosopher, libertarian, always has some fascinating knowledge to drop. Ladies and gentlemen, before we let this podcast come to an end, I wanted to talk about some of the issues that we are currently immersed in right now. Let me just bring up my face over here. Boom shakalaka. First and foremost, I recently posted an article on Steemit, which you should check out. Is black supremacy as dangerous as white supremacy? I mean, one of the things that I've been seeing on the Twitter sphere, on the interwebs, ever since the release of Black Panther, was a lot of people talking about black supremacy and this whole racial thing. The argument goes along the lines of whenever a black person makes a movie and we see so much success, all the black people talk about how they're proud, and if a white person was going to be doing that, it wouldn't be as socially accepted. And look, I think there is truth to that. I find that whereas it seems to be acceptable in this day and age to say, I'm black and I'm proud, if you were to say a similar statement like, I'm white and I'm proud, you would be deemed as essentially a racist. And the whole concept of racism is something that I've always had a lot of issue with, because technically there's nothing wrong with showing one discrimination, discernment. Whereas I believe in compassion, there is nothing wrong with showing discernment. If you want to discern that someone is more likely to behave in a particular way based off of your understanding of them as a person and who they're affiliated with. We all make decisions all the time in regards to this. We make decisions on who you're going to have in our close circles, who we're going to go on dates with, people that we're going to affiliate with, on many, many different things. And of course, the idea is that they shouldn't be prejudicial, but granted that it is an informed decision, there's nothing wrong with making a decision not to associate with someone purely based off of characteristics, whether they may be social, or based on anything for that matter. It may not be ideal, but it's definitely within your rights to do so. So the fact that a lot of people deem making any kind of distinction when it may be on something that's innate, something that you were not able to control, like your race, people see that as being a negative thing. Something I've always taken issue with. Personally, I don't really care what race someone is. In fact, I don't, along the lines of my interactions with people. But of course I have a bias when it comes to people that I want to be in an intimate relationship with. I find people that are very much not like me at all, physically speaking, are people that I'm attracted to. Are you saying that I can't make that decision on whether or not I want to date someone because they don't look anything like me? Because they, rather than having black skin, they have light skin. I like that. Is it racist because I choose only to date people that are very, very different from me? Ridiculous. But look, this article kind of talked about just race in general, some of the distinctions that we make in regards to black people and white people. It's more acceptable to be racist, I find, at present day as a black man, or say racist things, whereas it's not acceptable to say anything that's even remotely racist when you're a white man. And look, yeah, I like to be real about this kind of stuff. I find a lot of people in the black community, they don't want to bring these things to attention, and fair enough, they want to celebrate their race, but they're not willing to address the hypocritical comparisons between things that are permissible within the white race and not permissible within the white the other race. Anyway, be sure to check this article if you feel so inclined. Yeah, I've started making a habit of posting articles on Steemit. Great way of sharing media. I mean, there's DSound now. There's also DTube, so you can share videos, you can share music. And the cool thing about it is you actually get paid based off of how many people view this stuff or how many people like it. So, hey, you can either post things on social media and not get paid for it, or you can actually post things on social media and get paid for it. I think it's a no-brainer. Just a couple of things I wanted to briefly touch on before we wind this podcast down is one, in regards to the whole gun issue thing. I recently did a podcast. The last podcast I did covered the Florida school shooting, and obviously anytime you're talking about guns, it's a very controversial topic, and I noticed that the general attitude of people, not just based on my comments, but what I've been seeing on social media, is that rights don't matter. I feel like we live in a society now where people have changed their entire concept of morality. And look, like the conversation I was having with Sergio, regardless of how you arrive at morality, as long as your morality is right, in my opinion, that you believe in the idea that you can't violate me because, hey, I own myself. I don't care. Some people arrive at that through a religious mindset, and yeah, it's served its place. I mean, it's the Judeo-Christian faith to some extent. Granted, it has many negative things. Don't get me wrong, but that's actually led to many of these values. Many of the concepts that we have in the Declaration of Independence are based off of Christian values. The idea of an individual form of ethics. The whole idea of not stealing, not assaulting, not raping. These things are ideas that come from an individualistic religion based off of the Judeo-Christian ideals. And you essentially had the founding fathers that sanctified the Bible. The Jefferson Bible was essentially a secular representation of many of these ideals within the Christian faith. So regardless of whether or not you arrive at this through a secular approach or through the belief in God, I don't care. But there are so many people that seem to have adopted this idea that your right as an individual doesn't matter. And all I care about is my safety and making sure that we can bring about the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And there are so many issues with that entire perspective. And the fundamental one being in that you cannot definitively know what is going to lead to the greatest amount of good. And of course, people will often make the argument that you can, through predictability and probability, you can definitively prove things. But even if it is a probabilistic argument that you're making, it's not definitive. And my issue that, in regards to many of the millennials, the postmodernists, in regards to this debate, is they say things that, look, you are violating my rights because by you having a gun, it's statistically going to lead to more harm. And you can't make arguments like that. That's what you call an appeal to potentiality fallacy. The idea of saying that because you have the potential to harm me with this weapon, and because by you having this weapon, statistically speaking, we've used these statistical models to arrive at how when people have more guns it leads to violence, that's somehow an argument to take away my rights? That's not an argument. You can't use the potential for something to arise as an actual right or argument to deprive someone of their own individual rights, because one is actually based off of hard, definitive logic and reason. The other is based off of an appeal to potentiality, something that may or not arrive. And it's something that we find throughout history, people being willing to sacrifice individuals and their rights and do anything they want if they deem that as leading to the greatest good. It's the mentality of Genghis Khan. It's the mentality of Pol Pot. Let's take away the lives of these people, because by doing so we can unite the world. We can arrive at a much more prosperous society for all. I recently got into a conversation with someone just the other day, and they're talking about how they don't have a problem with killing billions of people. If they could press a button to kill billions of people, take away their lives, so that the world could be prosperous, they wouldn't have a problem doing that. Definitively in their mind, they were arguing that they are 100% certain that unless, of course, we kill billions of people, the world will not be able to flourish. There'll be a mass extinction. Therefore, in order to avoid this, they're willing to take away individual lives. And it seems ridiculous to me, because nothing is certain in this. Whenever we're dealing with the future, you can only make arguments appealing to potentiality. And as soon as you start saying, well, I know with definitive certitude that people are going to die or the world is going to come to a mass extinction, and unless, of course, I kill 1 billion people, it's an idea built of air and imagination. But look, it's just something that I wanted to express, because I feel as if this argument is coming, the gun debate is always coming from a place of rights versus what I believed is going to lead to the most amount of good, which is the fundamental argument whenever you're dealing with politics. I mean, the entire political spectrum represents this. You have those that believe in first principles, essentially the anarchists, anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, and then you have those that believe in the collective good. Then you have variations of this. Finally, last thing I just wanted to cover briefly was I noticed that there is this, once again, this massive debacle in regards to Craig Wright. Craig Wright, for those that are not aware, is Satoshi. Unofficially, he is Satoshi. Of course, it is an issue of much debate in the crypto world. Those that don't buy into his claim, or the claim of those that have actually verified his claim through private keys. But essentially, Craig Wright is going through a lawsuit at the moment for $6.37 billion. That's Australian dollars. I think it's about 5 or so billion US dollars. But it doesn't matter. Whenever you're dealing in the realm of billions of dollars, damn. He essentially has been sued for a shitload of money by the David Kleiman estate. And this is the fascinating thing. Apparently, because he created Bitcoin with the aid of David Kleiman. At least this is the lawsuit dealing with the fact that Craig Wright essentially emailed David Kleiman before he passed away, talking about how he wanted to work with him on this new form of electronic money. Now, of course, people are saying that he may have made this entire thing up as a way of pulling the wool over people's eyes, but it's pretty evident that that would require a massive, a massive conspiracy on his part. And I just think more often than not, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, the fact that he is actually Craig Wright. But what's interesting is that this lawsuit has been taken up by one of the biggest legal institutes in New York, I believe. And yeah, it's a serious issue. Apparently, Craig Wright is facing a massive lawsuit, and I personally think that this is going to, if it goes to the full extent of the law, it's going to arrive at, well, us knowing exactly where this thing stands, which is, as I've been saying for a while now, that Craig Wright is unequivocally Satoshi. And look, in regards to whether or not, look, the accusation is that Craig Wright apparently forged David Kleinman's signature and took away a certain amount of bitcoins that are obviously valued at $5 billion. Look, this is going to probably annoy a lot of people, but I really don't care. Look, if he did it, it's possible. It doesn't change the fact that, look, he's responsible for creating Bitcoin. And look, yeah, if of course, I'm not condoning the fact that he may have done that, but the reality is we don't really know. And once again, I always find it distressing how people are so quick to attack someone when they don't have possession of all of the facts here. The fact of the matter is there is a lawsuit going on, and in time we're gonna know a lot more, and it's gonna be interesting. This thing is playing out like the biggest Hollywood drama, and what I'm looking forward to when this entire thing is rested, has come to a halt, is a big Hollywood movie being made about Bitcoin, and it's starring Leonardo DiCaprio playing I know some character like Roger Ver, perhaps. Wonder who's gonna play Satoshi. But it'll really be interesting to see what happens, because this is turning out to be one of the most epic dramas I've seen in a long time. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna leave it there. Peace out. Keep it real. Don't drive in text. This is the Crucial Journey. I hope to be doing many more of these Skype podcasts. Let us know what you think. Drop some comments. Share this. Tell your mom. And yeah, give us some feedback. If you would perhaps like to come on the podcast, drop me a line if you're someone that is interested in the topics that we talk about here, or you know someone that might like to come on these podcasts. Be sure to hit me up. But until next time, peace out. Keep it real. Ow! This is the Esoteric Noetic. Crucial signing out. I want to leave you with my promotional video for my single, which is out at the moment. It's called Going Thunder. Speaking of which, I recently released another single called Dear Child, which you can check out on iTunes. Peace out.
You know, people in this life, they'll always tell you what you can and what you cannot do. You can't let nobody put limitations on yourself. You gotta know that deep down inside, you got the will, you got the power, you got the fire. So if you wanna go, you gotta go like thunder.
Without the beats, you want emotion. Bring home the rain, need no introduction. Have a moment, ponder on that weakness. Rise above it, keep working on that game, son. I'm about to school you when I thunder. I'm my ring, I groove, you know I got. Told me that it can't be done, but I told you the battle was over before the game was done. Now if you think that I'm gonna let you run my body, my heart, and my mind, then you better listen, son. Oh, you think you're invaluable, you act like an gold. Think you're gonna soar like a bird beyond impossible. I think it's plain to see, you know you're meant to be. Wants to work, serve to, gotta think and stop. What you want ain't always what you get. You don't do the work right, you won't find your best. You won't work it, you gon' pay the price. You won't work it, gon' pay the price. You won't work it, gon' pay the price. You won't make it. I don't even care where this road leads. All I know is to mess with the fire. Don't have to build to succeed, but you're kicking ass blues. You want it, you got it, gotta fight the doubt, stay on.